Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking your time on this chilly holiday night.
Not as chilly as it has to be.
Yes, we'll go ahead and get ready. My name is Jeff Frank. I'm the program manager here at Dearborn Labs. And I'm very excited to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. David Watts, who serves as the director of the Davis Institute for Artificial Intelligence at Colby College. Dr. Watts brings a rare combination of experience in this role. Before coming to Colby College, he spent more than 20 years at IBM, where he held senior leadership positions at the intersection of AI, hybrid cloud, security, mission-critical enterprise systems. Most recently, he served as vice president for hybrid cloud AI security and resilience, leading global engineering and product teams responsible for platforms deployed around the world. Dr. Watts also brings experience in governance and talent development. He chairs the finance committee of GEM National Consortium, where he supports pathways for emerging STEM leaders nationwide. As director of the Davis Institute for AI, he's helping Colby rethink how artificial intelligence intersects with education, ethics, creativity, and human judgment. Tonight, we'll explore AI's role in shaping the future of learning, work, and entrepreneurship, and what all this means for founders building in Maine. Please welcome Dr. David Watts. Thank you. We'll start off learning a little bit about you and your history, your experience. I'd like to start and ground us in your story. You spent more than 2 decades at IBM, ultimately serving as vice president for hybrid cloud, AI, security, and resilience, leading global teams, working on some of the most mission-critical systems for the company. What originally drew you into that work, and what kept you there for 2 decades?
Yeah, good question, actually. So when I was in graduate school, I thought I was going into academia. I was, going to become a professor, and that was what I thought I was working towards. And then interesting fact, instead of doing a postdoc, I got this great opportunity at Motorola. It's the Advanced Products Research and Development Labs. And I thought, okay, it pays more than a postdoc, so I'm going to go grab that. And then I'll go into academia. And actually, my thought was I wanted to go be a professor at a liberal arts college, which is where I went to undergraduate. So I went to Carleton College, which is similar to Colby in its approaches to education. And so I thought I'd go do that for a couple of years. And so I did, and I went off and did that for a few years. And then decades later, I'm in academia. So I made it.
Comes right back. Yeah.
So I didn't think I was going to. So that's what started me over in tech. And I think as I was going through my education, I actually started, I went from sort of fundamental work to more and more applied work, right? So I think I was drawn to looking at, applications of science, right, and technology.
And as we were just talking before we started, you began as vice president for hybrid cloud, AI, and security and resilience back in 2017, 2018. So that brought you through the breadth of a lot of the public's understanding and development of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Now that you're transitioning into a liberal arts college, are there some parts of that innovative structure, whereas in enterprise, you might have large teams, broad goals, and a very disciplined approach to innovation coming into a liberal arts college? Are there some aspects of that transfer well and some that need to be adapted?
Yeah, good question. I think let me go back to your point about when I started there. We were doing AI work, but it was, and you're saying it's before, so the things blew up. But IBM has been doing AI work since the 50s, right? When it was the inception of artificial intelligence, right? IBM has sort of been part of that and has gone through the evolution of that. And some of you might know about the Watson game show, right? I see a few nods. Where they sort of showcase their capabilities, et cetera. And there were all kinds of, changes, et cetera, in how AI was being implemented. And so when I started doing it, I was doing AI before ChatGPT, incorporating AI capabilities into our products. And then I would say, as ChatGPT came along, the realization that it was going to change the game in a lot of spaces, right, including in my teams, right? So I had a large team of probably over 2,000 software developers, and it became clear that their jobs were going to have to pivot, right? They were going to have to change their jobs, right? IBM Watson was developing, something like Watson Code Assist, which is a product of theirs, and so there are multiple code assistants out there, which meant that how you used to do your coding was changing, right? And one of the things I noticed was that the team was having a hard time pivoting, right? And one of the things I had said to the team was, you always have to have a startup mentality. And I had worked for a startup before I went to IBM. And in a startup, you don't have infinite resources, and you have to be ready to pivot at any point in time. And I was trying to have that mentality with this large, in a large Fortune 500 company, large group of software engineers, to be able to think about how you move, how you pivot, how you do things without the resources that you think you need in order to be able to do it, right? You have to do that at a startup at all times. So, and one of the things when ChatGPT blew up, sort of I'll call it Gen AI blew up, right? But ChatGPT was first. I noticed that even in a tech company where you think people move fast, right, and break things, the teams were having a hard time adapting and adjusting. And, one of the things I've always attributed my own success in the tech world was actually not to my intimate knowledge of technology. It was to the ability to go into new spaces and learn and understand and see a bigger picture and then apply to what I was doing. And I've always attributed that to, I'll call it the interdisciplinary nature of my undergraduate education, right? That, and you can get that in multiple ways, right? People can start out as, in one field and then switch to something, you start out in sociology and then decide you want to go into tech, right? And so you go into tech. But I found that people who had that interdisciplinary approach were actually typically better at pivoting. And I had always felt that through technology, while I was throughout my career. But it became very acute when ChatGPT came along, and we realized we're going to have to be able to pivot a lot more rapidly. So that was kind of my motivation, professional motivation for deciding to come back to.
Fascinating. Thank you. There's a bit of an inverse comparison there where you were understanding the humanities resonating out of technology and innovation at the enterprise scale, and now bringing that experience to the liberal arts and spraying it off. My understanding is that the Davis Institute is applying the AI across the disciplines. And how is that being received? What are you learning in the process?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And I think the goal of the Davis AI Institute has been, before I got here, right? I mean, Colby was doing this, right? Which was, how do we move the needle in education with respect to what's happening in the world, right? I mean, you recall that a lot of institutions just simply banned AI off of their campus, right? And many faculty, even at Colby, even with the Davis AI Institute in place, had similar philosophies, which was just keep it out of the classroom, and that way we can keep doing what we're doing, which has been successful, right? As I gave you the example of, right? So that makes sense, except that AI was transforming the world, right? And so how do we think about our education in the context of preparing students to go into that world, right? How do we think about the fact that world is changing the way students are going to operate when they get here, right? When they get into institutions? And so trying to move the needle with faculty on seeing that connection And there's some faculty here, like Raphael, who's doing a FIT fellowship with the Davis AI Institute to learn, right? It's a safe space to do sandboxes and try out new things with respect to what might work and what might not work. And that's really what it's all about. It's about that exploration. And out of that comes really great, nuggets about new ways to do things. Some of it comes from faculty's discovery, some comes from students.
I imagine one of the practical applications of that is the Mule Chat.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us what the Mule Chat is and
Sure.
what you learned from the process there?
Yeah, I actually just did a podcast on that with it's Inside Higher Education. So if you go look up my name plus Inside Higher Education, you'll probably find it. And it talks about Mule Chat and sort of the strategy with it. So it's something that was created before my time, before I got to Colby. And it was created as a way for people to explore in a safe space large language models and even have ability to compare. So you could ask different models the same question and sort of get comparisons, etc. And it allowed people, I call it an on-ramp, right, for people to try out these models and see what they feel like, etc. And so Mule Chat sort of became that. It was created. Mule, everyone knows this, right? The Colby Mule, right? So hence Mule Chat, and it's actually really cool. It was catchy. It was it suddenly felt like, okay, we can approach these models and start to play with them and see what they can do. And then since then, we've gone beyond the on-ramp to create access across the entire campus. Tapping into our Google, we were already a Google campus, and so we brought Gemini to campus, which then has capabilities like Gemini. It also has capabilities like Notebook LM, which faculty actually found very interesting because you could take documents, put them into Notebook LM, and then have your large language model work with those specific documents in a safe space. It's kind of like it's a RAG model, if you think about it. People know what that is, retrieval augmented generation. So, it's a place you can put it in a safe space that doesn't go into the models, your data, and then you can work with that data using large language models. And suddenly, doing FIT fellowships like one that Raphael's part of is, a lot of people use the Notebook LM to say, okay, I can use this in my teaching, right? I can use this in my preparation. And then starting to explore how you might be able to use it with the students themselves.
Well, it seems to be a unique approach in the post-secondary space where always saying, we're not going to hide from this. We're going to dive in, we're going to learn about it, and we're going to learn and improve with it. So I commend the college from the outside perspective. It's exciting to see the school so quickly say, we're going to not be afraid of this, or we're going to improve with it. And it brings apart that eagerness and that willingness to adapt as an institution, the same similar aspect in the application of the mission for the Davis Institute, which is focused a lot on the application of ethics in AI. Can you talk a little bit about how the mission of the Davis Institute and its focus on human-centered AI and ethics in AI take place in application?
Yeah, great question. And I'll go back to your point about, Colby deciding to jump into this. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. Just pause for a second. Colby started Davis AI Institute prior to ChatGPT, okay, for example. And then, went through the whole boom, right, in this pioneering way. And other liberal arts institutions, for example, there were a lot of R1s doing stuff with AI and doing research with AI. They were still challenged with respect to AI on the education campus, right? But Colby dove in. There were no other undergraduate institutions doing this. It was phenomenal, right? When you think about it, right? That they decided to embrace this, and it doesn't mean embrace it in the to your second point, right? It doesn't mean embrace this like AI is great and we're going to tell everybody it's great, right? It was embrace the whole spectrum to understand, the good. I'll call it the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is how I call that spectrum. Okay? That there are great things happening, but you also have to be aware about that whole spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, of some of the potential pitfalls and downsides and all of that. And so, to your point about ethics and understanding sort of how AI gets used, how it gets distributed into the public spaces, looking at that entire picture is extremely important. So you're spot on with your question. One, in that Colby was pioneering, and as a result, have been able to look at that entire spectrum and sort of lead the way. And we're still leading and learning, right? Leading the way means you're learning, you're hitting challenges and figuring your way through it. But what's cool about that is now a lot of other institutions have realized that they need to get engaged and are reaching out to Colby and connecting with us, and we're collaborating. So hopefully the footprint is growing. Right?
Yes. There's a variety of conversations going on right now about how the humanities adapt to AI, and what you see from an institution like Colby, that there's this reflection back on what is unique about the differentiation between human intelligence and artificial intelligence is the reflection that we need to focus on what is human.
Yeah.
And that comes out of the humanities at Liberal Arts School.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about human-centered AI as a phrase? We hear it a lot.
Yeah.
And we hear it in ethics and AI. In industry, always seems like it's framed as a constraint for progress, whereas society would certainly say that ethics and AI is a necessity. The Davis Institute obviously sees it as a value and a metric that needs to be understood and watched regularly.
Yeah.
How are students in their engagement with the Davis Institute, with the Howard Lab, engaging with AI on a day-to-day basis on campus?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well, right? Because I'll talk a little bit about our strategy in a sec, but I think going back to your point about people or companies really seeing it as a constraint, meaning ethics or regulation, right? This is the debate, right? If you compare the U.S. approach to Europe, you'll see, Europe is probably using more regulation. The U.S. is trying to open things up because we're in a race with China, right? So let's go. Let's, not use regulation holds back. Now, I'm at the risk of using an analogy, which I always caution people when we do this, right? A lot of people like to use analogies, especially when it comes to AI. But I'm going to go back in time to think of regulation in general, right? Think of the automobile industry and safety regulations, and how many people lobbied against them because it was going to slow down their capabilities and hurt us, and et cetera. And then along came, I think it was Volvo, right, that said, we're going to embrace this, and started advertising. They went beyond the regulation and started advertising that they're the safest vehicle on the planet. And suddenly, people realized, that actually is a plus, right? I think there's something in that with respect to AI. It's a completely different beast, okay? So make sure we treat it differently. But if we think about
what it means to be responsible with your technology, and the ability to then embrace that and say, look, we're producing responsible AI, right? You can turn that into an asset for your company. Right? Does that make sense? So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is, if you pay attention to those ethic components, think of the lawsuits that are happening with OpenAI, etc. There's always potential when you're irresponsible that you hit disaster and it tanks you, right? So there's also the concern. So you're trying to avoid the risk of regulation slowing you down, but at the same time, you may go over the edge the other way, right? Where you go so fast that you actually fall off a cliff because you hadn't considered things. You hadn't taken time to think about that safety aspect. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that because you mentioned that, but then you also asked about how students are using it. So I'll come back to that because at Davis AI, the strategy was actually to start, even though students are our charge, right? They're first and foremost, but we started with faculty, right? And there was an important reason for that, because having the buy-in of an approach, the right approaches with faculty are extremely important to try to get the messaging to students and try to actually be able to help your students. Okay? So we did a lot with faculty. I mentioned the Fit Fellowship. We've done other types of ways of engaging with faculty such that they have places to explore, etc. And then we started doing a lot more with students, right? So doing a lot more direct interactions with students, classroom visits. We just recently started an AI club on campus so that the students can get to a place that's innovative. And then at Colby, we have these beautiful centers that can help us, right? And so Lisa right here is with the Halloran Lab. Already some people here know Lisa pretty well. So that as the students engage and come up with innovative ideas, and by the way, where do innovative ideas come from? They typically come from the interface across disciplines. So suddenly let's go back to that whole concept of what a liberal arts education is about and how it's interdisciplinary. And it drives incredible innovation. And then we're now have a center in place to help capture that innovation and turn it into something real. And many students have done that and gone off and actually started something. And some of them are now coming back to Colby, right, Lisa, and helping us, inspire the next generation of people. So to me, that the magic happens when you really engage the students, and then they have ideas too.
And it comports with the philosophy of preparing to be facing in the job market artificial intelligence as integrated into whatever workspace they may be entering.
Yeah.
That they have a comfortable understanding of their boundaries, their ethics, and how they use artificial intelligence.
Yeah, you're spot on. Now, I do want to add one more point to that, because it's extremely important that the concerns that faculty have are real, right? It's not like we're trying to move the needle and convince them otherwise. They are real concerns. What we're trying to say is that those concerns need to be addressed and find ways to address those concerns, right? If students just copy and take answers from GPT that are answers to problems and just copy and paste, right? They haven't learned anything, right? And I'll give an example that a professor said when in one of we call them bagels and bots sessions with our faculty, and he talked about trying to get the students to engage, and many of the students were like, "We're fine, leave us alone," right? Which doesn't mean, by the way, they're not using AI, right? But one of the ways he said he got the students to engage was, he said, I talked to them about, look, if you're cutting and pasting your answers, what are you going to do when you leave Colby? Because what job are you going to go to where they want you to cut and paste answers from an AI, large language model, right? They don't need you. They already have the answers, right? So it's really what they need is someone who has thought through beyond that, right? And to be able to engage with it in a critical thinking way. And he said that's when he saw a number of the students start to nod, and he got much better engagement at that time. So I think that's the crux of it is understanding where to use it, where not to use it, figuring it out, etc. And making sure that whatever we are doing is driving the critical thinking that our students will need when they go into this AI age. Coming back to your point, right?
So that's really exciting, because helping students throttle that balance in between how they engage with AI or rely on it can really ultimately, hopefully, help both the student reach their potential and whatever the potential may be of actualizing the new AI tools.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little broad now about artificial intelligence. If you were going back on your experience in enterprise and innovation, if you were briefing a boardroom tomorrow, what One that's serious about AI, but is still sorting signal from noise in this space. What do you think is the most consequential strategic mistake organizations are making right now about AI adoption? We're thinking about the corporate level.
I think probably I would say the biggest area of concern that I think many corporations have is they think too narrow. Right? So you have a problem. Typically, what are you trying to do? You have a problem. You try and solve it. You do some R&D. You get a good group of technical know-how on it. You get some business savvy people to say, how do we get this out into the market? And you get it out into the market. I think that one of the challenges with AI is it requires training. And the training, if you think too narrowly, is going to really bite you, in the long run, because a lot of the problems that we see with AI, like people say AI is biased, or but it isn't that AI is biased. It's that AI actually is incredibly honest. It reflects our biases right back at us, right? So if you're going to think through what do you do with this model, and you don't incorporate a large sample, right, and learn from it, which is always a challenge between speed, right, and doing your due diligence, right? If you don't do enough of that, then you're likely gonna, once it gets out into the world, right, AI will, reveal the shortcomings very quickly. And we've seen some of that, right? So, some of the suicides that have happened as a result of somebody interacting with a chatbot thinking it had the capability. And by the way, companies allowed that to happen. It wasn't like they had caution, for children, or since we've put it out so early, let's put it in a safer space, or right? And we just learn these things on the fly, right? And one of the grants that we just won at Colby, Colby was the only undergraduate institution as part of this grant, with people at UC Berkeley and Dartmouth, who's built a chatbot in Brown University, is around mental and behavioral health and AI assistance in that space. It's an incredibly complex space. And it requires, why did we win the grant? Because we have to think as broadly as possible about all of the different, we'll call it contexts, that people can engage with these models. And how do we ensure that we've thought through all of those different contexts, right? So that it actually ends up adding value and the risk is mitigated, right? So that's just one example of a space where, if you've thought too narrowly when you put this out, it can lead to challenges.
And is that a multi-year research project?
Yeah, it's 5 years.
Okay. Funded through
NSF.
NSF.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's
actually,
incredibly important.
Yeah, it was kind of cool because we didn't know if it was going to come through, given a lot of the cuts that the NSF went through. But the NSF was pretty cool. After they got their cuts, they actually went to corporations. Mm-hmm. And so this grant that NSF had like people like Intel and Capital One that helped shore that up so that they could still give the award. And so we were lucky it came through and it worked out.
So you've brought your talents to Central Maine, which we appreciate.
Well,
and
whatever they're worth.
And from that perspective, are there asymmetric opportunities for rural locations like Central Maine to take advantage of artificial intelligence? And we're thinking whether it's at the municipal level, there's certainly an equalization in both access equity for AI, for morality that levels the playing field. But I'm trying to think of, are there ways that startup companies coming through Dirigo Labs, coming through Halloran, can take advantage in an asymmetric way and take advantage of their morality?
Absolutely. And in fact, that concept I was just saying of thinking too narrow, right? I mean, if you want to design a large language model to do X, Y, Z, and you go to New York City and you get 1 million people to to train it, right? A rural environment might actually be missed out on, right, in that training. And so it ends up providing less value when you try to go apply this product. So I'm coming back to that point I made. So engaging in rural areas is absolutely critical to how do we ensure that we have incorporated everything into the products that we provide. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is there are unique challenges and problems in rural areas that don't exist in cities. And so it's absolutely imperative that those areas engage and find ways to utilize and create large language models or AI capabilities that suit their needs. I'll give a story of in New Zealand. A few years ago, I took my daughters to New Zealand, and we went to. They were big Lord of the Rings and Hobbit fans, so we went to the Hobbiton in New Zealand. It's a beautiful area, incredibly rural, and beautiful hiking. I just read a story about the indigenous population in those rural areas that they were already a threat, right? Again, AI reflects the biases and so what they were finding out was models were not incorporating their concerns, including their language, which was at risk already. And a small group there got funding, engaged, and they flipped it on its head, right? Because then what they started doing was using the large language models to save the language, right? And they went around and trained large language models using old people in their communities who were the last people living who had certain dialects of their language, capturing them, recording them, using it all to train this large language model. And suddenly it's now actually a tool to save their language as opposed to a threat to them. And so that's, I'll pick an example, far away from here, probably as far away as you can possibly get. But it's similar in all areas.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's a great example. We're losing languages all the time.
Correct.
And
right.
oral history as a way to capture.
Right.
Being mindful that we're living through history with AI. We'll certainly look back at this last decade or so as an inflection point in history. When people look back at this moment in the development of AI, what do you think will turn out to be one of the most misunderstood or simplified aspects of this point in AI development?
You're asking really good questions that make me think. But
or underestimated.
Yeah. Actually, that almost was where I was going. Is there have been both. I mean, AI has done some incredible things. But wow, that's amazing. But there's also been a lot of, I'll call it overpromise, and again, take it with a grain of salt. No one can predict the future, not even me. But if you think about how OpenAI has been charging forward, they've been doing it under the premise of we're heading towards AGI, and when we get there, great things will happen. Let's go, right? And there's a lot of factors that go along with it. But I'm much more practical, right? I told you I was drawn to apply things, right? So I've been looking more at what is AI capable of doing, right? How do we capitalize on those capabilities and mitigate the downsides of them? And I think when we look back, there'll probably be, again, it's a prediction, I may be wrong, so take it with a grain of salt, but there'll probably be a view of maybe a recognition that there was a bit of an overpromise of what AI is going to do in the long run. And there'll be hopefully more sort of practical recognition of the use of AI as a tool that helps us in certain cases. And in other cases, we don't have to apply AI in that space, right? And so understanding where those spaces are. So that's probably the biggest one when you look back.
So that the current presumption of universality may not pan out.
It may not pan out. I don't know if you'll ever get to AGI. I mean, even experts will say, some experts will say it's coming, it's coming. Some experts will say invention is required for us to ever get there, and so therefore we don't know yet. Yeah.
Drawing on your experience co-creating enterprise AI systems and now shaping AI in education, what technical competencies, cognitive habits do you think every student should develop as they leave post-secondary education and go out into the real job?
Yeah. So I'd say the biggest things that they should develop haven't changed. Okay. Many people go, oh, you got to have AI literacy. Teach them what they need to know so that when they get there, they can do the specific job that we're training them for. I actually think it's more nuanced than that, right? Because the reality is we want to make sure we train students to be ready for that world, but also to be ready for the dynamic nature of that world. Coming back to my first, where I started, right? My reasons for coming in the first place, right? We want to prepare students that when they get there, it's not like, oh, I got trained in, we provided Gemini, so I'm an expert on Gemini, and you get there and it's like, nobody cares about Gemini. Here's what we're doing. We're using these models to interface with this device, to do this thing over here that looks completely different than what we learned. Have we taught them to make that pivot? And I think that's a big part of what our education should focus on, even in the age of AI. It's not only about training for the tools themselves and giving them literacy. It's about having them experience enough with those tools, but also understand that those tools are changing, right? And think about how they might change, and have them think about how they might change.
I wonder if the origin of that adaptability and resilience is curiosity, or maintaining a need to understand the next thing.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I have we can open up for questions now. Thank you very much for tolerating my questions.
You bet.
And I have
good ones.
a couple written in advance. One from Dr. Catherine Del Vecchio Fitz, founder and CEO of Savin Insights, will be joining the Dirgo Labs next cohort.
Okay. That
She
name
has-
sounds familiar.
Yes.
Is she here?
No, she's unable to be here
Okay.
in person.
Okay.
She wrote in advance.
Okay.
As AI systems increasingly rely on data generated by communities themselves, how should we think about data ownership, consent, and giving value back, especially in smaller rural places? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. There are huge challenges with that, actually. So data, right? Who owns data, right? And how does it get used? How does your own data get used, right? So data privacy, and I think a lot of that has been moved into a gray area in the age of AI, right? Where people are using, scraping data from wherever they can get it, because the more data you can get, the more robust your model. At least that's the theory. There are also theories that you can, if you're savvy about how you use the data, you can take smaller amounts that are more fit for purpose for specific examples. But in general, people want data. The more data, the better. And so they're scraping it. And the question is, are they crossing a line with respect to, pulling people's data without permission, etc. And I know there are lawsuits in there, and I don't know how they're all going to turn out, but it's a valid question. And how do we control data in the age of AI? Right? You can expand that to just privacy in general, right? How do we ensure that we have, remember all those privacy laws we used to have? They still exist, right? But they just seem to be blown away, right? Where people can, are using facial recognition without permission, things like that. So those are all questions that it's a great question. I wish I could be the expert to sort of say how it's all going to play out, but it's going to have to play out, and we need people paying attention to that. So that's why I like that question. Right? How should it play out? What should we be doing? These are questions that I want students thinking about as they
Goes a little
So
bit
not a clear answer as to the solution, but recognition of the problem.
Yeah, it was a little bit back to the hybrid AI model at IBM, where allowing users to protect their own privacy and stay within their secure spaces of their data centers.
Yes, that was huge for us.
Questions for Dr. Watts? Sir,
Sorry.
How would you say that, regardless of the advances of technology, it seems to me that the value of liberal arts education is still able to think critically, and to go back to Aristotle, those who want to succeed must ask the right preliminary questions, whether it's in AI or whatever. And I'd like your view of the value of liberal arts education in today's AI world.
Oh, wow. Well, I probably projected my bias on that front, right? In that, I honestly believe you're spot on, right? I mean, the value of a liberal arts education is to drive critical thinking, which is, by the way, why the threat of it was so huge, right? Which, when I was going back to my point about why it's a legitimate fear, right? That the AI can come in and undercut the value of a liberal arts education, but the solution to therefore keep AI out is not the right answer, right? The right answer is to engage with it and understand, bring it, and then use it to find ways to drive critical thinking. We have a professor in our midst who, has come up with an idea of using AI with their students to imagine things that don't necessarily exist, okay? And get students therefore critically thinking. If students aren't using it as shortcuts, which many still are, by the way, just to be clear, but if they can start engaging with it as a form, let's say a form of brainstorming, right? Going a back and forth, right? I think many people think of these AI tools as any old computer tool that we've had in the past, right? And they give us the same answer every time that we ask for. You can do your research and then put in something and it spits out an answer and that's your answer, right? And you trust the answer, right? AI tools are not like that, right? They are inherently not like that. No matter how well you train it, you still have to think through, do I trust this answer? And you still have to ask the right questions. Brilliant, right? So now think about that, right? We've always taught in a liberal arts education, how do you ask the right questions, right? So now you have to know how to ask the right questions of a large language model, for example. So in a way, you're hitting spot on why the liberal arts and AI are a match made in heaven. And in fact, I would argue that liberal arts are, at least interdisciplinary approaches to learning, right? There are other ways you can do it, but liberal arts do it by nature, are essential for this time, right? I mean, that's how I think about it. Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think you shared it. Oh, sorry.
So I have one for myself, but I also have one on Zoom. It asked, is agent creation and small language models possible at Colby? Is Davis AI the campus resource for that?
Sorry, is what creation? Sorry, there's a fan going.
So it's okay. Is agent creation?
Like agentic AI, yes. And is that the model at Colby?
Is agent creation and small language models possible at Colby?
Possible, sure.
It's agentic is huge right now because people are, and for those who don't know it, agentic is where you can ask a model for a specific task and then it jumps back and then you go back and forth with it and you always the human, coming back to your human in the loop, right? Is a huge part of that. Agentic AI is you put, usually it's multiple models and you ask it a question and agentic is because, think of a travel agent. That's probably a good analogy, right? Because you ask a travel agent, I want to go to Rome, and then the travel agent goes and not only takes action for you, they do other things, they check the areas, and then maybe they come back to you and say, here are the possibilities, and then you say, well, I want this, the other thing, and then the travel agent goes and says, okay, we'll book you the car, we'll book you this, and so it takes multiple steps of action. So agentic AI is trying to do that. Now, if you pause and think about that, that's a significant task, right? Because one, you've introduced. I just talked about the downsides of AI, of it perhaps giving you wrong information that you have to check. Well, what if it has wrong information, it has to go to another model and take action for you? And then it might go to another model that also has the risk. It goes to another model, it's compounded, right? So agentic AI is a significant area that has potential for applications, but requires a lot of even more robust, testing and training and all of that in order for it to be successful. So it's an important area for students at Colby to understand because it's huge in what it's going to be out in the world. But it isn't necessary that students have to have agentic models on campus in order to be able to understand and do that. Does that make some sense? Yeah. And then you had one yourself?
My question was AI and well versus just experimenting with it because it's something that they feel like they should use.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a clear answer, but your point is you're hitting on a point that I think is important, which is many people feel like, oh, I'm behind. I have to use AI. So they go and they want to just grab something and stick so that they can say they're using AI, right? Which is true. And the reality is it shouldn't be thought of that way, right? Coming back to my practical, it's a tool, right? So the first question you have to ask is what are we about? What do we do? The same things you've always asked when you're a company, whether you're a startup or a Fortune 500 company. You have to ask, what's our mission? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? And fully understand all of those things and then say, how might AI be able to help me, right? And if you do it that way, I think then you can go answer. So the caution with the companies in terms of not being ready is usually because they're charging forward to get some AI so that they can say that they're relevant, right? Because let's face it, I mean, what percentage of funding, AI funding, is going to, startup? What percentage of startup funding is AI driven right now? It's the lion's share, isn't it? Yeah. And so people feel like, if I don't have something with AI, I'm toast, right? And so they grab something without thinking necessarily through what's the best value. It's also true that certain things AI is not necessarily the solution for. And so you have to have thought through that. And so if you don't have something that AI can actually help you with, then, why are you grabbing AI to put within your company? You're going to spend time and energy, but you can spend time and energy and find out later that it actually isn't the right solution for you. Right? So, very good question. Sorry.
Is there something, like the neural networks, is there something on the horizon that we're going to look at? We're going to say, the neural networks are cool, but this is really cool. Like, or the LLMs, is there anything on the horizon that I just remember, like, distributed database is really cool. LLMs are really cool. Is there something that we're not talking about now that we're going to, 5 years from now, we're going to,
Maybe. So I have a speaker coming to Colby that I invited I think it'll be April 2nd, who's coming to talk about quantum computing. And quantum computing is similar. Quantum computing is the next generation of computing. It's a completely different space. It's a space where classical computers don't have access to. So what would that mean, right? And so it things that would take more than our lifetimes, generations of lifetimes to solve a problem like that, quantum computers can do that, right? So, but again, it will likely be quantum computing in concert with classical computing methods, right? And so classical computing methods include AI. And so you can imagine that AI might actually interact with it, right? And what are those applications? Again, we don't know yet, right? We've used quantum computers have been used in things like molecular modeling and things like that that would take a long time. AI has been used in that space. You recall the last you heard of AlphaFold from Google DeepMind, which was the last Nobel Prize,
not the last one, the one just before, the one that just got announced, sorry, was applying AI to a case like that. And there are cases, similar cases in quantum. So the question would be, how might those two things work together? So that's one I can think of. But, you know.
I can't remember working, like, I can remember I one shot an application, and I was like, well, it's the first time in my life, and I'm like, wow, this is something crazy.
Yeah.
Have you seen that before in history, like throughout your whole career?
Um,
Was there a moment when you were like, wow, this is really impressive, that's equivalent to the LLM?
I think the internet kind of did a little bit of that, for sure, and proved to be transformative, right? And I think AI is the next one, right? Since then, in terms of like, whoa, this is going to change everything, which I think is what you're asking, right? I think those were probably two big ones, and then you'd have to go to electricity or something before that, right? So I don't know. Good question, though.
So I like to kind of tie in and talk about Colby, talk about the AI, talk about the students, talk about the faculty. It seems like we have a roadmap of school board, maybe onward.
Maybe, yeah.
Then think about Maine. In Maine, doesn't have any company that's digitally
Doesn't have what, sorry?
any company that's digitally native.
Okay.
So that's part of that. It doesn't have Fortune 500 without. It's made out of a whole slew of small and medium-sized companies spread across. And we just talked about companies having FOMO, fear of missing out. And they're probably having the fear of missing out. And you have these students coming out with learning some, it could be skill sets, it could be tool sets, it could be mindsets that you're teaching come out. How should they interact so that Maine, like what's the roadmap for Maine here to make sure that the hundreds of thousands, whatever, rural companies that we have here can actually utilize the talent that you just point.
Yeah. Great question, and I'm a huge fan of think globally and act locally, right? So, one of the things, why did I come to Colby? One of the things that drew me to Colby was that there was actually a huge strategic initiative at Colby to ensure that it engaged. This is part of that, actually, right? Isn't it? Right. Where it engages with locally in Maine, right? So to your point, and so AI is going to be a part of that as well, right? Meaning, so one of the early things I did after taking this job was I went and gave a panel discussion, led a panel discussion at BioME, and on that panel discussion we had the Jackson Labs, we had the Rue Institute, and then we had a small startup company called Ovation.io, right? And we had I'm missing one, University of Maine, for example. So, and we talked about partnerships, right? And to me, that might be the trick within Maine, in that there are a number of really good, high-quality institutions. There are a number of really innovative small companies, as you mentioned, startups. And one of the panelists said, I think of it like the Goldilocks, syndrome, right? That Maine is not too big, right? And it's not too small, but with partnerships, it could be just right? Where we can actually collaborate in a meaningful way and come up with things. So the startup company was Ovation.io. They have one of the biggest genomic data sets. I think they're the largest in Maine, right? And then what do they do with that? What kind of learning do they get out of it, right? And so they need to partner with other institutions, right, to get something out of it. Another aspect is this thing I'll call X plus AI, right? X being your thing, right? Here's your discipline, whether it's healthcare or like mental and behavioral health, the example I gave for the NSF grant. And so finding those X's within Maine, and then figuring out how AI can help is extremely important. I've talked to a number of partners, including, Maine General, for example. How is AI being applied? And they'll talk about the challenges they're facing with access and cost. And the question then is, can AI help us with this? So coming back to that question about what do we, first finding out what the problems are and then thinking through how AI can help. I think there's a lot within Maine that we can do. And I'm excited to be able to do more of that. I would love if larger and larger percentage of Colby graduates or graduates out of Maine institutions actually had places to go within Maine, and that number climbs up, right? That would be pretty awesome. Good, very good question.
Well, on that positive local note, thank you, Dr. Watts,
Oh,
for
thank
the
you.
time.
Thank
you,
you.
everybody, for joining us.
Someone who shall be named nameless said, "Is this a fireside chat? So is it going to be a fire?" And well, there was fire in the questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank